Okay, so welcome everyone. As Melissa just mentioned, we're absolutely delighted that over 200 people have signed up to be with us tonight for our town hall meeting. My name is Lucy Abraham. I'm the CEO here at Glassdoor. I've met many of you. Before we start, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. We're expecting today's session to last for around 30 to 35 minutes. There'll be a chance to ask questions at the end. Don't worry, plenty of time for questions, but you can also use the Q&A box at the bottom if you'd like to put your questions as they arise throughout the session, and then we'll call some of those out at the end and go through them. We are also recording. We'll be sharing both the recording of the video and also a very short slide pack after this session, so don't worry if you don't catch everything right away. So hopefully many of you might have joined us at our fireside chat earlier on in the year and will have caught up on some of the things that have happened so far in this very challenging and unusual year for everybody. But before we start with a sort of recap and then moving into exciting plans about what provision we're going to be looking at this winter, I just wanted to introduce, well, in fact, I'll let them introduce themselves. So Megan, do you want to start?
Yes, hello, I'm Megan Preston. I'm the Service Development Manager at Glassdoor.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm the one of two operations managers at Glassdoor.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and I'm one of the other operations managers at Glassdoor.
Hi, I'm Corinne Heaney. I'm the new volunteering officer at Glassdoor, so we'll be a point of contact for a lot of you this winter.
So you'll be hearing from all of my colleagues throughout this session, but I, as I say, just wanted to start by sort of recapping on where we've got to so far, and then sort of setting the scene, I suppose, for what everyone else is about to tell you about the winter. So yeah, we're really excited. This is the first time that we're sharing our plans publicly, and you know, it feels right. All of you who give up your time to support Glassdoor and our guests, you know, you really are the backbone of everything that we do. So we're really excited to be able to sort of share this with you now, and yeah, hope you're going to be really excited and enthused as well. So just rolling back a little bit to March, when our night shelters were still open. Many of you will have been volunteering last year in the night shelters. We were very fortunate in that we were the first night shelter project in the country to be able to decant our guests into the GLA hotels. And at the time, 127 guests moved from the shelters into the Pan London hotel scheme. Now, not only was that hugely important for keeping our guests safe and well in obviously what was a very kind of dangerous time, but also that has provided opportunities for our guests and for our caseworkers who've been able to continue working with those guests. So where ordinarily our shelters close at the start of April, it can be more difficult to carry on with that really important work that the caseworkers do with our guests. But actually the time in the hotels has given our guests that stable base that they need. So for many of them, they said, this is the first time I'm sleeping in a bed, you know, I've got my own television, I've got my own bathroom for months and in some cases years. So it's been, you know, in many ways that was a fantastic opportunity for them, and it's enabled our caseworkers to help them on into more permanent housing, and we've been really pleased to be able to do that. So that's one of the real positives. Since the initial cohort from the shelters were moved into the hotels, our caseworkers were able to continue referring guests in, and in total over 200 guests were referred into that scheme. So yeah, lots of positives to draw from that. But I suppose in more recent times, our real focus has been on looking at what this winter will look like, and obviously having to consider quite a different model to our normal tried and tested rolling shelter model. So although it's been a very, very difficult time and has presented lots of challenges, it's also a great time to really innovate and to start to rethink how we've done things and what is the most positive model for this winter, to talk to our guests and get their input, to talk to a lot of our volunteers and our church venues. So we're really excited to unveil our plans. So I won't talk for too much longer now. I'm going to hand over to Megan, who's going to do some more of the scene setting about the considerations for this winter.
Thanks, Lucy. So some of you may be aware that there have been restrictions in place since our shelters closed in March and over the summer, which have prevented night shelter environments from taking place. The reasons for this is based on government guidance, based on the expertise of Public Health England, and the concerns that they've had around shared air spaces. So what we mean by that is a large room, like we often have in our church halls that are used for the night shelter, where a lot of people are breathing into that same space, and there's concerns that the particles or the aerosols can actually stay in the air and could infect people. So the recommendations have been for self-contained accommodation, like the GLA hotel provision that has been taking place. And another consideration, as well as separate bedrooms, has been around bathroom access. So again, if we think about our typical night shelter model, we often have over 30 guests sharing church facilities that might just have 1 or 2 toilets. That's not suitable at the moment. The current guidance says that ideally everyone should have their own bathroom, but at maximum 3 to 4 people should be sharing. So all of these considerations have been things that have been things that we've been taking into consideration and have been factors affecting us thinking about doing things a little bit differently this time. And many of you might be thinking, well, how do we balance the keeping people off the streets over the cold winter with the risks of COVID? And that's something that's definitely been on our minds too. So just to let you know, we are being proactive about that in advocating for the needs of people experiencing homelessness to have solutions to come off the street this winter. And we are reiterating the need for more research in this area as well about the balance of those risks. But just to give a little bit more context as well, it is a very serious situation. We are talking about a population that on the whole is more vulnerable to health problems than the average, whatever an average person is, than the average person. So we have to be really careful, and Public Health England made this guidance based on looking at examples in North America where, unlike here, night shelters actually stayed open and brought people in during the pandemic, and even with testing and other safety precautions in place, they did see a high infection rate, and sadly there were many lives that were lost during that activity. So it's something that is being taken very seriously. So with uncertainty in the air about shelters, we've wanted to remain proactive in planning for what provision there will be this winter. We know that people are going to need our services. So we have been thinking about how we can develop models that are really flexible and are going to be resilient if guidance loosens or if guidance tightens as well. And we have, as Lucy touched on, we have been involving guests in that. So we have done a survey with guests that have been visiting our casework service, and also with some of the guests in the GLA hotel provision that were previously guests of our night shelters, to ask what their priorities are at the moment, so that can shape some of our decision making too. And I just want to caveat finally that the doors are not completely closed to night shelters. We are expecting some government guidance to come out shortly, potentially in the next couple of weeks, and that may change things. It may set a different scene for night shelters. We're doing everything we can to maintain really good links with the government, with local authorities and public health teams throughout this. So we're hoping to be right at the front of the queue to see that guidance when it is published. And then we can figure out what that means for us and adapt our models that are designed to adapt. So we're really excited to share with you a bit of the outline of what those services might look like. And Matt's going to start by telling you a bit more.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to tell you about one of our 3 strategies that we're pursuing for this winter. Our plan is to offer 2 hostel sites within the centre of London. beginning the 2nd of November through the beginning of April, so our traditional season. So this would be single room accommodation with some shared bathrooms and would have space for 88 people. So at this time, we're actively pursuing buy-in and approval from the relevant authorities, of which there are quite a few. But we don't have final approval at this time, so everything's subject to change, although we're confident that we'll be able to deliver this. Our goals are to provide a COVID-safe provision during a time where there'll be a national decline in the number of shelter spaces. So if you think around the country, lots of different shelters are run by maybe 1 or 2 churches, all volunteer run, and in a lot of those situations, they're simply not going to be able to open. So the 88 bed spaces are about half our usual provision of beds, although we'll do our best to increase that any way we can. This will really require a shift in how we provide our services. So that includes round-the-clock staff, additional contact with our casework service, and additional service from other service providers. So it's really a great opportunity. Even though it's a change in our model, it's really a great opportunity for Glassdoor to deliver high-quality service where guests have a stable place to stay, where it's safe and secure, and they can begin the process of moving into more permanent accommodation. So it's a really exciting opportunity. It's a resilient plan, so that if everything goes wrong and we go back into lockdown again, at least we can continue to serve our guests in the best way possible. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And I'm going to pass you over to Jeff, who will talk a little bit more about one of our other strategies.
Great, thanks, Matt. So another plan we have for the guests is to have a dinner service, which will be held at up to 5 of the venues and churches where we've currently had night shelters in the past. So we're hoping to host those at in every borough that the shelters have currently run. I say be up to 5, but there will be a difference in that it will be the same venue every night, either the same venue or will be shared with one other, and that's one of the current shelter venues at the moment. So that will provide continuity for the guests, as well as being able to provide a meal in a safe environment for both the guests, volunteers and the staff, as it won't be roaming. Now we will, that wouldn't mean that would be the same volunteers that would be at the hosting at that venue. So we'd be looking to see if you guys can help here, and Corin can speak about that in more detail later. But it would be a centre where the guests could come, have a dinner. We would be looking to manage that in a way that it wouldn't be just for the guests to turn up. So we can make sure that it's done in a safe and timely way. So the guests would likely register for that service. That said, we might, depending on the government guidelines and the changing landscape of COVID, we might need to turn the service into takeaway only. And we might look to do that as in conjunction with providing the dinner inside as well, because we will have a limited number of spaces, as we'll need to socially distance all the guests. So Corin can explain a little bit more in detail as to how that would work out in terms of the volunteering opportunities and where you guys can help us out significantly. There will be, they hope that there can be other services that we can provide within the dinner service, such as the caseworkers will have an opportunity to reach out to guests who would otherwise not be able to access the day services that aren't currently operating. So that will be something else we can look at, and there is potential that we might be able to operate other services. Again, much of it is very dependent on the guidelines that will be set down by the government and Public Health England. As Megan alluded to earlier, we have to be very careful that we don't open a shelter where we would potentially put our guests to further risk than they are at present. But there is still the planning in place to look to see that where we would offer the dinner, that could potentially open up as a shelter. So we are looking to have those measures in place, and we are planning accordingly for that. If that was to happen, that would look a little different to the current model, The main difference being that we would need to look at the numbers of the guests, because we certainly couldn't have 30 guests in the same environment for the reasons as Megan explained earlier. That will, as I say, is an ongoing process, and we're not in a position to say whether we can do, but we certainly hope that we'll be able to support our guests in those ways. So on that note, I will hand you over to Corinne, who can explain a little bit more about the volunteering opportunities and what way you guys can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi everybody, good evening. Like I said before, this will be the first time you've seen my face, hopefully not the last this winter. I'll be your point of contact. I just want to start by saying a big thank you to everybody who's reached out over the last few weeks with your offers of support and flexibility in terms of volunteering, and just shown a real willingness to do what you can to support our guests. It's been really motivating whilst we've been planning to have you reach out and say, let us know what we can do and we can help. We're so grateful for that, and knowing that our Glassdoor volunteering family have got our back. You're absolutely essential to our work, and this winter will be no different in essence, but in practicality it will be different in what volunteering actually looks like. So the actual opportunities, volunteering opportunities that we are anticipating as being the main ones where you can be involved are, as Jeff was talking about, the dinner service. As mentioned, likely 1 or 2 venues per circuit. It's obviously not realistic for the volunteer team who usually volunteer at that church to do every night on those circuits at those venues. So we're anticipating a different volunteer team each night, preparing food at either their regular churches or their own homes, and then bringing it to that venue that is doing the dinner service, and then potentially distributing it to our guests or supporting staff distributing it to our guests. That's probably going to be the biggest volunteering opportunity that we do have. There is an option as well for a second opportunity, which is what what Megan was talking about, that there is always the option that we could pivot to a static shelter model. And the key thing here is that it wouldn't be rotating. There's no real opportunity to have 7 churches in each circuit this winter. So it would be likely the same venues that we do in the dinner service. If we are able to do shelters there, we will look into that. And again, volunteer teams led by volunteer coordinators. It's difficult to say at this point what that would look like, but in reality, it might just be an extension of the dinner service volunteering roles. We're going to have to limit contact with each other and with guests as much as possible. So that's something that we are keeping our fingers crossed for and hoping that that will happen. A little caveat to that, if that does happen, there will be warning, there will be lead-in time. I've had a few people reach out and say, we need time to prepare. Don't worry, we're not going to spring it upon anybody. We are liaising with churches. We'll make sure that you are prepared, and only volunteers and churches who are able to do that will be doing that. And thirdly, there's a whole range of other things, volunteering opportunities that we are developing and seeing come out of emerging guest needs, but we can't say exactly if they'll happen or not at the moment. Language volunteers and translation, we think we're going to need. We're going to have new services, so we're going to need new information so that people actually know about what those services are, and the people who need to know are able to understand it in a way that's suitable for them. So potentially language volunteers and translation. We're currently looking at safe ways to restart our women's group at the moment, so there's maybe opportunities to be involved with that. Some of you may have heard of or been involved with our befriending scheme that we piloted earlier in the year. We're currently doing an evaluation for that, and if it proves to have been beneficial to guests, and if it's something that they really got a lot out of, we would look to roll that out wide. So keep your ears out for that. We're anticipating as well we might need more support in the office. Might not necessarily mean in the office, but with our office work, we're obviously a lot working from home at the moment, but we are potentially going to need some more support with the back office things. The hostels that Matt was talking about, there may be an opportunity to volunteer in the hostels, but we really don't know what that would look like yet. And the key thing to note here is that any new volunteering opportunities will be based entirely on guest needs, and we can't really anticipate entirely what that will be just yet. Whatever they tell us they need, we're going to try and support that and have you guys help us with that. Yeah, so some key things to bear in mind around those opportunities. We're almost certain that we are unfortunately going to be able to accommodate less volunteers than usual. As much as we would like all our volunteers to resume, Last year that was around 1,600, and we simply can't safely facilitate that while keeping everybody safe and meeting guest needs. So there likely is going to be less opportunities than normal. Also, another thing to consider, there's likely going to be less direct guest engagement. Obviously, for safety, for COVID, we need to kind of minimize people mixing as much as possible. So a range of the volunteer roles might not be working directly with our guests. And another thing to note, it may not be at your usual venue. Your nearest opportunity to volunteer, your church might not be offering the dinner service, but you may have the opportunity to go to a nearby church within your circuit. In mind, I just wanted to say, please don't feel pressured to volunteer this winter if it's not what is best for you. If you are shielding, if you want to really limit your contact with people, if it's not suitable for you to travel to a venue, that is fine. Please don't feel pressured. We want you to feel safe. We want you to feel comfortable. Consider a winter off if any of those things apply to you. There will be other ways to support us this winter. We plan on keeping you all up to date with what's happening and ways that you can be involved, and we will very much be keeping you as part of the family. So do think about that. For those of you who will be volunteering as well, do be rest assured that safety is the main thing that we're going to be thinking about. We're going to keep staff, volunteers and guests safe while really putting guests at the heart of our services, and we need you to do that. Need you to help us do that. So next steps for volunteers and volunteering. When we know exactly what services are being delivered and how volunteers will be able to support that, we're going to be in touch with you with information about those roles and about those numbers, and ask you to express an interest, and then look at those roles and look at the numbers of people interested and match those together, hopefully seamlessly. If you're a volunteer coordinator, please pencil into your diary the Thursday, the 8th of October. In the evening, we're hoping to have a virtual induction for volunteer coordinators for the start of the season. There will likely be a volunteer one later in the month, date TBC, and coordinators as well, do feel free to do your own induction with your volunteers later in the month, once you know what those teams look like, of course. One thing I do want to talk about, if you want to support us immediately and you are raring to go and have loads of energy and want to do something right away, you've probably heard our sleep out is on the 2nd of October. This year there's opportunity to do that either in Duke of York Square with us or remotely from your own home or garden or church. A few of our venues are doing their own church ones and linking up with us, so socially distanced, of course. So if that's something you are interested in, please have a look on our website. They're always a fantastic night, I've been told about. So yeah, have a think about that. And just to close, for our hand back over to Lucy, just to reiterate, we will need volunteers. You are essential to our services. Thank you for your dedication and flexibility to support our guests. We couldn't do any of this without you.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you everybody else. I won't talk for too much longer because hopefully that was quite a good, clear overview. And as I say, we will be sending slides afterwards that summarise what we've said. One thing that I just wanted to touch on that I didn't mention in my introduction was we're asked quite often about what we're expecting demand for this winter to be. You know, there were some big headlines saying, well, homelessness has been solved now because everybody's been moved in, thanks to everyone in. Unfortunately, the stark reality that we're seeing day by day already, that our caseworkers are seeing, is that so many people are coming in who are newly homeless for the first time. So, you know, just to give you a couple of quick examples, we had a man that was living with his elderly mother who she had to shield, and so therefore he wasn't able to stay there anymore. He came to us seeking support. Another example, somebody's flatmate died of COVID, and you know, they couldn't live there anymore. And we're expecting in the coming weeks and months to see more and more people who, because of the economic impact of COVID, just aren't able to keep their job and keep their home. So there's government measures in place at the moment, things like the furlough scheme and other measures that are, you know, sort of keeping the economy slightly more buoyant than it might be. And actually, in a couple of months' time, just as cold weather hits, we hit winter, we're really expecting demand to rise, and you know, we're expected to be busier than ever before. So just to sort of flag how important this winter is really going to be. Right, we won't talk any longer. Let's take some questions from the floor. I'm going to hand over to Melissa, who I think is going to read some for us. Or we can't hear you, Melissa.
Unmute. Thank you. We do have some fantastic questions, so thank you to everybody for submitting these. Please do continue to send them in. It's great if you can put them in the Q&A, but we're also seeing some wonderful questions coming through in the comments, so we're reading those as well, and Rachel and I are behind the scenes sifting through. So I'll start by combining a few of the questions, asking for some specifics about when the shelters are, when the food service is going to start, and do we know where they're going to take place? And if we can get some specifics on that, perhaps from Jeff, if you could answer that one. And also, sorry, Aaron asks if we know how many guests are expected for dinner service.
Sure, great questions there. Our plan at the is currently to open our services on the Monday, the 2nd of November. And that would be in conjunction at the same time as the hostels. Now that is still subject to change, but that is our current plan at the moment as to where we will be looking to open up. In terms of the numbers, we are again looking at that in terms of how we can operate safely with the number of guests. So we've been investigating the best way and looking into if that can be by pre-registration for the guests before, recognising that that is not going to be straightforward for many guests if they need to register for dinner, but that might be the way that we can ensure we know how many guests are going to come and we're not overwhelmed. And we will look to put into place measures so we don't waste any food. So in terms of the numbers at the moment, with regards to sitting in, we haven't a different number as yet, but we'd be looking at around 15, we estimate, and then we're looking to see how many guests we could serve outside as well. Possibly up to about 40 if we had takeaway as well, but as I say, it's going to be very much dependent on the venue and how we can space the guests so that everyone is safe and we can operate in a COVID-safe manner. So we don't have a definitive answer in terms of the actual numbers, but it would be in that range.
Sorry, Jeff, just to clarify, that's 15 in the inside per venue. So
that's correct.
Yeah, so that would be times 4 or 5, depending on how many circuits.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are some specific questions about which venues will be hosting these. If you could speak on to how much you're able to reveal at this point, or when you might know and be able to share that. Okay.
Well, we do have some. We are in conversation with a few venues. Our hope is that we can have one dinner service in each of the boroughs where we currently operate. So that's 4 boroughs. That's looking like it might be a bit of a challenge at the moment. So at the expense of being a little bit vague, we are currently hoping to have them in Chelsea, Chesterfield and Westminster, Fulham, Hammersmith and Fulham, and Richmond. Because the venues have yet to be confirmed, it would be a bit unfair to say where we think, because we're currently having dialogue with those venues. So sorry if I can't reveal all of that as yet, but we will, as once we have a firm stamp on that, we will put that out to everyone so you know where the volunteering opportunities will be and where to head. So we will keep you posted on that score.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, we're hoping to be in a position that in the first week of October, we'll be able to sort of publicly confirm each of the specifics of the venues, and we will be in touch in the meantime. So we've been liaising with all the church venues, so it's not, don't be concerned that there's going to be any surprises for anyone suddenly finding out. We are in touch with all of them. and then we'll be able to sort of be public about it at the beginning of October.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
We are also getting some questions about clarifying whether cooking can take place in the venue, and if not, why not, and how that will work. Perhaps one for Corinne. What do you think?
Yeah, do jump in, Lucy or Jeff, if I've got this wrong. I think it's different in each circuit, or depending on different church. It's not the same for every church. Some churches, I think, would be okay with all the cooking happening in their church every night, with different volunteer teams coming in to do that. But there might be churches where they've had to rent out that space to other groups, so cooking would be required to do somewhere else. So there isn't a one size fits all in terms of that, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. We have a question about teas and coffees from Rosie. Would that still be a possibility for the volunteers who are keen to do that?
Certainly serving teas and coffees in some manner will be possible, but with everything will look slightly different. So there probably won't be roaming around outside and passing coffee cups to individual guests, again, just because of the COVID safe element. But rest assured that there will be some provision of tea and coffee to our guests in a safe manner. Thank you. Really good question from Rona about PPE, personal protective equipment, for both volunteers and guests. Will we be providing them? What's in place in terms of that? I'm not sure who the best person to ask that to. Megan or Jeff or Matt?
I can take it. We're prepared to provide all the necessary PPE, cleaning services, and cleaning materials, including masks, gloves, face shields. So there shouldn't be any need for anyone to bring their own. They'll be required for anyone volunteering in any capacity, staff as well, and guests. So we'll have exact guidelines prior to opening, but safe to say that we'll be following all the government guidelines and providing all the necessary materials. Great, thank you. I have a question about the sleep out. Perhaps this one is for Lucy. Is the sleep out exempt from the rule of 6? Very good question, and not the first time we'll be asked it, I'm sure. It is indeed. So because it's a charity organised event, it's actually comes under other rules. It's exempt from the normal restrictions around group gatherings. So it is indeed exempt from the rule of 6. Anyone attending the physical sleep out will notice it will be run very differently, again, to normal years, and we will be very much stricter about marking out areas where people are able to sleep and about distancing between groups and things like that. But in terms of the overall event being able to take place, the rule of 6 does not apply. And I want to put a plug in there too to say anybody can take home wherever they feel most comfortable. So we're encouraging people to take part from home or to take part in a garden if you have access to one. So we have a whole live stream program planned. So we really do encourage people to take part from wherever they feel most comfortable. Okay, next question. We have a question about translations. One of the volunteers is curious to know which translations we expect we will need.
Yeah, sure. So the most common languages that our guests typically speak tend to be Polish, Romanian, and Tigrinya, but also other Eritrean languages are helpful as well. We also get a lot of guests that speak Arabic, and generally just any languages really. So if you've got language skills and you'd like to give them, then definitely get in touch. If you email Corinne, or if you email volunteer@glassdoor.org.uk, just get in touch and let us know, because there's always a need for a guest that speaks a language. And what we normally do is prioritize the most common languages for professional translation, but we could potentially utilize volunteers for translating languages that we normally aren't able to.
Thank you. I have a really good question about funding. Vicki and Steve Lawrence are asking, where is the funding for the hostel accommodation coming from? Perhaps this is one for you, Lucy?
Yeah, another really good question. You won't be surprised to learn that funding individual rooms for our guests instead of spaces on the church floor is more expensive per guest. We had a fantastic initial response to our COVID appeal. and we've got a number of our regular funders that have supported us in the long term, have been sort of closely following conversations about what our winter provision looks like. So we will be going out to specifically fund via some of those funders the shortfall, if you like. Again, sleep out is really important this year. It's always an important pillar of our fundraising, but it becomes more important than ever before in terms of really maximising the money that we raise from that event. So yes, we've got a good strategy in place for funding all of the planned services. But anything anyone wants to do, another brilliant way you can help to volunteer is organising your own events and rallying your friends.
Great. A specific question about Barnes. There is some concern about with the Hammersmith Bridge closed. Will Barnes Methodist Church be involved? And it sounds like with the closure of Hammersmith Bridge, Barnes is very hard to access for guests. So will Barnes Methodist Church be involved this winter? I suppose that's a question for about both volunteers and location.
Jeff, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think, well, the short answer is that at present not. We have been looking at all the venues and churches as to whether they'd be suitable for the guests, and the easier they are to access, the better. We have taken into account the fact that the transport is quite difficult at the moment, and will be for the present future, which could have potentially been a big problem for the shelters, being on the roaming basis. So Barnes isn't planned to be part of the dinner service at the moment.
Thank you. I have a question from Carolina, specific about the women's group. Will our women's group at Chelsea Methodist Church return? Lucy, perhaps, or Megan?
Yeah, so we are hoping that the women's group will return. The day service is resuming at Chelsea Methodist Church now, but in a different form, and we're in conversations with the church about how we could use that space safely. We're hoping to do things a little bit differently when we restart women's groups. So as Corinne mentioned earlier, we're going to think about how volunteers can be involved in that, and there might be some slightly different opportunities there in terms of doing a bit more of the organising as well, which I think you'd be interested to find out more about, Carolina. So perhaps you can have a chat with Corinne.
Thank you. There's a less of a question than more of a suggestion. I think it's just an interesting one to mention here from Libby. How about inviting people to sponsor a room? I suppose the question around there could also be, have we thought about it, and perhaps what the cost would look like, and do we think that's an attractive option for a potential supporter?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Libby. And it's actually not something that we had specifically considered in the past, but obviously is a very effective fundraising tool when it becomes very tangible and people know what they're supporting. So yeah, absolutely. We do know what that cost would be per person, and I think yeah, that's certainly an idea that we'll take away. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Felicity about dinner service, and she's wondering if it can be served earlier, say at 7 p.m., as volunteers will need to travel further. Is there any flexibility with the start times of the dinner service? Perhaps, Jeff, this is one for you.
Sure. That isn't something we've considered as yet, but it's something that we could look into potentially. We would have to work on a time scale that works with everybody. So I wouldn't say no, but we would probably look to have a consistent time that would work across the board. So at the moment, we've been looking into similar times to when dinner would be served in the shelter model. So the dinner would be ready for about 8 o'clock. Generally, what happens with the volunteers is that many of the teams will start at different times anyway. So that might be the way that would realistically pan out in terms of not all volunteers would be able to get to the venue at the same time. So you might have a team who would start perhaps preparation earlier and other volunteers join later. But at the moment, our general line of thought is that it would be around about 8 o'clock when dinner would be served to the guests.
Probably worth emphasizing that the volunteers will probably need to leave by then anyway. There'll be less direct contact with the guests, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, not all volunteers, but yeah, most volunteers won't be staying on beyond the time that the guests are there, and that's again, just to keep everybody as safe from COVID as possible.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions from different places about looking for, I think we touched upon this a little bit already, but looking for some more clarification on when volunteer coordinators, for example, will know, and what's the process for letting the volunteers know about what will be available and how they can get involved. I'm just thinking there's another aspect to that I'm missing from another question. Will church teams advise volunteers of the programs that are available? So when will they know, and how will that information be passed on? Perhaps this is one for Corin.
Yeah, thank you. So we're hoping early October latest for us to know exactly what churches are involved and exactly what that dinner service will look like. So I'm going to say early October, but if you are a volunteer coordinator and you're already in touch with your volunteers, I suppose there's no harm trying to get a feel for who is, ready and willing and able, and who is wanting to sit out this winter, so that it's not a mad rush when we do have that information in 2 weeks. So do, see what the feeling is with your volunteers at the moment. And when we do know that, we will be in touch with a more clearer picture of what those volunteer roles are, what numbers we're talking about, and then asking people to express an interest and say who wants to be involved, who can volunteer this winter. And then we'll hopefully match those up and get as many people on board as possible.
Thank you, Corin. I have a question from Gabby. It's a similar question I asked when I first heard this plan, and I appreciate that it's not always clear when the first time you hear it. The question is, are the guests who are having dinner, are they the same guests who are in the hostel accommodation? And let's see, how about Matthew, if you could take that one on.
Yeah, so the guests in the hostels will be completely separate to our dinner service. There's a kitchen, and there'll be provision inside the hostel, so they're contained. The dinner service will serve rough sleepers and other people in the community. And I also know that there's a couple questions about where the hostels are located. They are located in central London, but we won't be narrowing it down past that. Unfortunately, there's been a few security incidents at other hotels. So central London will be as far as we share publicly.
Okay, so we're not going to tell volunteers or anybody where those hostels are located for security reasons, because at the end, those are going to be staffed. Maybe you just want to clarify that the volunteers won't be involved in that provision.
Certainly, we would share with any volunteers that come into the hostel. There may be an opportunity for a small amount of volunteers to volunteer, but it's mostly staff. And just for the security of our guests and our staff, we'll be keeping it tight to the chest. So I apologize for the cloak and dagger. Thank
you. I have a question from Claudia, wanting to know if people can help that people, rough sleepers who are on the street, and do we have any advice about that? That's a bit out of our remit usually, but looking to see who might be. Lucy, do you think that's something you could take on?
Well, I was just going to say what we always do is provide a small kind of wallet-sized leaflet that people can distribute to rough sleepers that they meet on the street. That just advertises how to be able to access Glassdoor services. So in the past, it's been, here's the shelter hotline to register for our shelters. Here's where to go to one of our partner day centres. Obviously, this year it will look a little different, but it will be the same concept, letting people know how they can register to access either the hostel or the dinner service, and possibly the shelter. So that in terms of that, signposting our services. I mean, in terms of more generally how to support people, we always say we don't want to mandate what to say and what to do, and that has to be a personal decision, depending on what feels right at the time. We always say the most important thing is treat people as humans. stop and smile at them and have a conversation with them. If they'd like a bottle of water, you know, and you feel able to, then buy them a bottle of water. But there are no kind of fixed rules as such, but you know, our encouragement would be stop and give people that respect.
Thank you, Lucy. And I suppose the following question would be, how do we give out these cards? We would need to update them with the new information. And usually what we do is we make them available through the shelters, and we'll be looking to do, I suppose, the same thing again. So yes, watch the space, and we'll have some materials to share with people if you see them on the street. All right. I'm going to ask another question here from Rosie. How many of our guests are still in hotels, and how long are they going to be there?
That's a very good question, Rosie, and I don't think we looked at the data. We have we track all the data through our system, and I don't think we know the exact number unless anyone else can jump in and help. But we can come back to you with that number. But rest assured that a large proportion are now in you know, more permanent accommodation, either thanks to work with our caseworkers or thanks to you know, support that they've been able to access through the hotels and through the support there. So yes, we can come back to you with the exact numbers.
I suppose the other thing to ask is, has anybody been forcibly removed from the hotel? So does anybody that we've helped put in the hotels on the street, back on the street, as far as we know?
I don't think we know of anybody who has been evicted from the hotel or banned from the hotels.
Yeah.
There were a couple of our shelter guests that didn't that chose not to go into the hotels in the first place when we did the decant. And there are some people who think that will have left of their own accord.
There are also some who were moved into accommodation that the organisations running those hotels, so St Mungo's, for example, decided something else was more appropriate for them, so they moved them into supported accommodation, or for rule breaking, but again, they've moved them into a different kind of St Mungo's accommodation that was less risky for them.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee asks, will we be able to volunteer on the same day we usually do with volunteers from our usual team to keep that family and community feeling? And I don't know, Megan, I think this might be a good one for you, if you could address that one, and Corinne, if perhaps as a backup.
Yeah, we're hoping that many, potentially not all, but many of the volunteer teams will be able to have a small number get together and prepare a meal, whether that's at your usual volunteering location or whether that's at another nearby venue. So we're hoping that there will still be opportunities for people to maintain that social contact, which we know is such an important part of the volunteer experience as well.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at the clock as well. We have about 7 minutes. If anybody has any additional questions, please do continue to put them through, ideally in the Q&A section, but we are scanning the comments as well to make sure we haven't missed things. Annie Rothwell asks, what are befriending opportunities and what is meant by that? If you could give a little bit more detail on the befriending scheme. Again, I think that's for you, Megan.
I'll take that.
Okay, sorry, Matt. Thank you. Please do.
Sorry, Megan. The befriending project was a pilot that we did, so we had a limited number of befriending relationships between our existing volunteers and guests who are in hotels. So that probably looked like a phone call once or twice a week. It was relatively successful. So that pilot is now closed, and we are going to review how helpful it was and from our guests, and if we're able to roll it out in a safe way this season, then we will try to do so, but it's still pending a proper internal review.
Great, thank you, Matt.
It's a good question though, because actually, sorry to interject, it's a good question because one of the you know, one of the things we've valued most highly out of the church night shelter environment has been that chance for our guests to interact with you as volunteers, and that really is so important for, you know, their social cohesion and for their mental well-being. And you know, we are very mindful about, with a move into a hostel environment and own rooms, that actually they're losing that really important element of what they normally get from the shelters. So it's very much on our radar as to you know, how we can make something like the befriending scheme, or at least replace that element of interaction with volunteers.
Thank you. So we just had a few last minute questions pop up, which is great. So I'm going to try to see how we can put any of these together. But the rule of 6 was brought up as how is that going to apply to guests eating together and volunteers working together to prepare a meal? And then there's another question about 15 dinner guests sitting in and out in the night. It will be hard to put 15 dinner guests. I think that probably is also referring to the space available with the proper distancing. Yes.
I also read that question. I think what they were asking is how are we going to deal with the emotional impact of sending people out at night to go, so the people that would normally stay, and that being a difficulty. I think that
answer it.
Yeah, I just realized I can answer it as well. I think that is going to be really difficult. It's going to be an expectation that we have to manage with the guests right from the beginning, that this unfortunately is only a dinner service. It's still meeting a need that they have for information, resources about where they can get casework, for food and drink, for other things that we'll be able to offer to them, like phone charging and other toiletries and things that they might need. So it's still a really needed service. Please don't be disheartened by the fact that we will have to have less people staying with us overnight, and ultimately it might not seem like the kindest thing to do, but it is the kindest thing to do if it's keeping people safe. But it will be difficult.
Well said. And perhaps we can also take on the issue of registering for dinner service, and will that be required for takeaway as well?
So we've been having lots of discussions about this. We are currently not 100% decided, but we have been leaning towards the idea of people registering in advance in some way, potentially, to prevent queuing, so that it is the safest possible way. But as always, we want to prevent barriers to people being able to access services. So in the event that people do present in desperate need, of course, we will be able to provide something for them, and we will try to prepare a little bit of food, a little bit of extra food, so that there is something for people who arrive unexpected. So that's not 100% confirmed, but that's the way that we're leaning towards at the moment. And just looping back to the question about the rule of 6 for volunteers together and for guests, again, that doesn't, like the sleep out, it doesn't apply in this context of charity work. So we probably will recommend that volunteer teams are limited to 6 anyway, but it's not a restriction that is in place. And for guests, it's not a restriction, but we will social distance them.
Perfect, thank you. There's a question from Rona about members of Glassdoor staff helping. So I think probably just to clarify, what is the balance of staff and volunteers on a dinner service? Looking at Jeff, thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to cover that. We're looking to have as many staff as we would do in the normal night shelter setting. So we'd have 2 staff members, one of them who would manage and lead on the role with a backup, a second staff member throughout the course of the evening, and they would be around taking into account the service that we might have some guests who might be queuing beforehand, so they would be on duty for at least 3 hours to cover the whole period when any guests might be in the vicinity or in the building itself.
Thank you, Jeff. Can I just say that with 1 minute left, I'm going to combine 2 questions, and anything we don't answer, we're going to do our best to take it on board and send out answers directly. So the next questions are around the day center services. When will the showers reopen? Are the day centers available, the washing facilities, and what is our needs for clothes and toiletries?
So a couple of day centres, the Ace of Clubs in Clapham and St Cuthbert's over in Earls Court, have remained open throughout the pandemic. At the moment, and Chelsea Methodist Church is opening now, and others have got plans in place to reopen as well. At the moment, there's not shower access available at most of those places. It's incredibly difficult to plan all of the deep cleaning and that would be involved for guests coming in and out. I know that they have made exceptions for some guests in extremely desperate situations, but on the whole, there is a reduction in shower services available. The Passage over in Victoria, which is not usually one of our formal partners, but we obviously work quite fairly closely with them. They do have showers available, and we have got a system where our caseworkers are able to refer a small number of people over there for shower access. So there's still options out there for where people can go for advice, definitely for casework, and we're still continuing to see people for casework at our office in Chelsea Methodist Church, as we have done throughout the whole pandemic. So if there are people that are in need and you don't know exactly where the right place is to send them, just contact the Glassdoor office anytime and we will figure out what is the best place and give you or them that advice.
Thank you. And last but not least, can we address if we need any clothes, sleeping bags, warm toiletries, and are we accepting those kinds of donations? What would we recommend people do with those kinds of things?
Who wants to take that?
I wondered if Jeff wanted to say something on that. I think there is going to be a reduction, definitely at our speaking for our partners, there's a reduction in what will be needed, and also in terms of what people can store, and it's going to be a bit difficult. I think we're going to be asking for some very specific donations only. Did you want to say any more on that, Jeff?
Yes, just to follow on from that, it's a very good question, and we ourselves are not in a position where we know exactly how we can distribute any donations that we get. Generally, in the night shelter setting, logistically, it's quite difficult to distribute anything from our vans and in the night shelter setting. In the same way, we would have similar difficulty in passing anything on at the moment. So we would normally signpost our guests to the day centres where they could get access to services and have clothing donations, but that's available at the moment. But when if and when we have something in place, we'll feed that through to the volunteers, because we may be in a position where we can pass on donations, which might include clothing or other items, toiletries, as we have these static venues in the hostel. So that might be a possibility, and we'll keep you posted on that.
Thank you. Any last words, Lucy?
No, hopefully this has been really useful for everybody, and thank you so much for the questions, which I think have raised some interesting challenges for us and given us ideas to take away as well. This is very much, as Corinne and others have said, it's part of an ongoing conversation, and do get in touch with us, and please rest assured that we will communicate really clearly the details as soon as we're able to, and we're hoping that will be in early October. So just to say thank you all so much. I said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. We couldn't do what we do for our guests, who are ultimately the most important people, without all of you. So a massive thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.